The censors thought they could erase us from history, but filmmakers had other ideas. From 1934 to 1968, the Hays Code banned any inference of deviance on screen. Ready to discover how directors smuggled queerness into cinema anyway? Keep watching. Want to see which classics got pulled from theaters for being too gay? Let's dive in. The Celluloid Closet, 1995. The Celluloid Closet isn't just a documentary, it's the ultimate decoder ring for queer cinema history. Based on Vito Russo's groundbreaking book, this film exposed how Hollywood both erased and secretly encoded LGBTQ identities throughout the Golden Age. The documentary features jaw-dropping clips that slip past censors and interviews with stars who knew exactly what they were doing with those ambiguous performances. When it premiered at the New York Film Festival, audiences gasped at scenes they'd seen 100 times, but never understood the hidden meanings behind. Narrated by Lily Tomlin with contributions from Susan Sarandon and Tom Hanks, the film reveals how directors like George Cukor and Dorothy Arzner embedded queer narratives in plain sight. What makes this documentary particularly fascinating is how it shows the evolution from coded characters to explicit representation, tracking the cultural shifts that paralleled the gay rights movement. Critics hailed it as revelatory and essential viewing, with Roger Ebert calling it an eye-opening history lesson that changes how you'll watch classic films forever. Its release sparked fierce debates about censorship and representation that continue to influence discussions about queer cinema today. Different from the Others, 1919. Different from the Others holds the distinction of being the world's first explicitly pro-gay film, released decades before Stonewall in Weimar, Germany. This groundbreaking silent film stars Conrad Veidt as a violinist who falls in love with his male student, leading to blackmail and tragedy when their relationship is discovered. What's absolutely wild is that this film was made as educational propaganda to challenge paragraph 175, Germany's anti-gay law. When the Nazis rose to power, they hunted down and destroyed nearly every copy, with only fragments surviving today through the efforts of film archivists. The film was so controversial that its director, Richard Oswald, collaborated with Magnus Hirschfeld, the pioneer of early gay rights, who even appears in the film making the case for acceptance. Its message was revolutionary. You must not condemn the abnormal man because he is abnormal, because he can't help it. When partially restored in the 1970s, critics were stunned by its modern approach and explicit challenge to homophobia. What makes this film particularly heartbreaking is how its progressive vision was violently suppressed, showing how history doesn't always move forward in a straight line. Film historians consider it one of cinema's most important lost treasures, with Martin Scorsese calling its partial recovery a miracle of film preservation. Glen or Glenda, 1953. Glen or Glenda might be the strangest, most misunderstood film ever to tackle gender identity in the conformist 1950s. Directed by the infamous Ed Wood, often labeled the worst director of all time, this bizarre docudrama stars Wood himself as the cross-dressing protagonist struggling for acceptance. The film was actually commissioned as an exploitation flick to capitalize on Christine Jorgensen's gender confirmation surgery headlines, but Wood turned it into a deeply personal plea for understanding. What's mind-blowing is that horror icon Bela Lugosi appears as a cryptic narrator making bizarre proclamations like, "Pull the string," while surreal dream sequences feature Wood rolling in Angora sweaters. Despite its reputation as so bad it's good, Glen or Glenda was revolutionary in distinguishing between cross-dressing and transgender identity when even medical professionals conflated the two. The film was effectively banned in many states under obscenity laws, with theaters facing police raids if they dared to screen it. Critics initially dismissed it as incompetent trash, but modern scholars have reappraised it as accidental art and a work of raw, personal anguish. Tim Burton's biopic Ed Wood revealed how the director poured his own struggles with gender expression into the film, making it perhaps the most authentic, if technically inept, portrait of gender nonconformity from its era. Song of the South, 1946. Song of the South remains Disney's most controversial and suppressed film, banned from official release in the U.S. since the 1980s for its problematic racial depictions. But what many don't know is that the film also faced scrutiny for the queer coding of its main character, Uncle Remus. The character's flamboyant storytelling, colorful attire, and nurturing relationship with the young white protagonist set off alarm bells with censors already nervous about the film's racial dynamics. Disney executives reportedly demanded rewrites to masculine up James Baskett's performance when test audiences found him too effeminate. What's particularly fascinating is how Disney marketed the film differently in international markets, where promotional materials emphasized Uncle Remus as a magical, almost fairy godmother figure, leaning into rather than away from the queer subtext. When the NEAACP protested the film's premiere, their complaints included coded language about the character's inappropriate influence on children, revealing how racial and sexual anxieties often intertwine. The film won Baskett an honorary Oscar, making him the first black male performer to receive an Academy Award. Yet Disney has kept it locked in its vault, refusing to release it even on Disney+. Film historian Richard Dyer has noted how the character embodies the magical Negro trope, while simultaneously representing the confirmed bachelor archetype common in family films of the era, making it a complicated text for both racial and queer representation in cinema history. Wings, 1927. Wings soared into history as the very first film to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards, but censors nearly clipped Wings due to its surprising queer content. This WWI epic features a passionate same-gender kiss between two fighter pilots that's more romantic than any straight kiss in the film. Director William Wellman, himself a WWI flying ace, insisted on the intimate moment to show the depth of friendship between men at war. But that's not how audiences read it. The scene left 1920s viewers gasping, with reports of walkouts in more conservative theaters across America. What's particularly bold is how the camera lingers on their faces afterward, showing genuine tenderness rather than playing it for laughs or shock. When sound films arrived shortly after, the production code cracked down hard on such moral perversion, making Wings the last mainstream Hollywood film to show such explicit male affection for decades. Silent film star Clara Bow, who appears in the film, later claimed Wellman deliberately pushed boundaries, saying Bill knew exactly what he was doing with those boys. The film's remarkable aerial photography and battle sequences dazzled critics, but many reviews delicately avoided mentioning that scene, using euphemisms like unusually close camaraderie. When Paramount restored the film in 2012, modern audiences were shocked by how explicitly romantic the moment feels, proving that sometimes the earliest films were the most progressive. The Wizard of Oz, 1939. The Wizard of Oz might seem like innocent family entertainment, but this Technicolor masterpiece faced serious censorship battles over its camp sensibilities and queer undertones. MGM executives reportedly demanded cuts to Judy Garland's Over the Rainbow performance, concerned it was too melancholic and mature for her character, though the real issue was how the song became an instant anthem for outsiders yearning for escape. The original script featured even campier elements for the Cowardly Lion, with censors forcing rewrites to tone down his sissy behavior that might encourage deviant identification. What's truly fascinating is that the film's costume designer, Adrian, himself a gay man, deliberately created flamboyant looks that would resonate with queer audiences while flying under the radar of studio heads. When Garland later became a gay icon, many pointed to this film as the spark that ignited that connection. Film historian Alexander Doty has documented how the Stonewall generation grew up with annual TV broadcasts of Oz, internalizing its message that finding your tribe could mean creating a chosen family of fabulous misfits. While never officially banned, some conservative communities restricted screenings based on religious objections to its magical content, though private letters reveal their actual concerns about the film's unwholesome influence on traditional gender roles. The American Film Institute ranked it among the greatest films ever made, yet its most radical aspect might be how it smuggled queer sensibilities into millions of American living rooms, disguised as a children's story. Dracula's Daughter, 1936. Dracula's Daughter sank its teeth into queer cinema history with Hollywood's first explicitly lesbian vampire, pushing boundaries so far that significant portions ended up on the cutting room floor. This atmospheric sequel to the Bela Lugosi classic features Gloria Holden as the sophisticated Countess Maria Zaleska, who preys primarily on young women in scenes dripping with sensual tension. The film's most controversial sequence shows the Countess luring a homeless artist back to her apartment, with director Lambert Hillier using shadow play to suggest an intimate encounter between them. Censors demanded cuts to this scene, eliminating dialogue where the Countess compliments the woman's beautiful throat while gazing at her lips. What's remarkable is how the film frames vampirism as an addiction or condition the Countess wishes to cure, creating an obvious parallel to society's view of homosexuality. When originally released, several states demanded additional edits, with the Ohio Censor Board calling it too suggestive of unnatural practices. Critics at the time noted the film's unusual psychological approach, a euphemism for its queer subtext. Film scholar David J. Schall discovered production notes revealing that Universal executives were fully aware of the lesbian coding, hoping to capitalize on the success of the lesbian-themed novel, The Well of Loneliness, while maintaining plausible deniability with censors. The film's tagline, "She gives you that weird feeling," takes on an entirely different meaning when viewed through a queer lens, making it a pioneering work of horror that dared to suggest women's desire for other women. Salomé, 1923. Salomé stands as cinema's most audacious queer spectacle of the silent era, with every frame dripping in gender-bending decadence that sent censors into an absolute frenzy. Based on Oscar Wilde's scandalous play, this avant-garde masterpiece stars the legendary Alla Nazimova, a bisexual Russian actress who reportedly cast the film entirely with gay and lesbian performers as an inside joke. The production design features men in heavy makeup and sexually ambiguous costumes that blur gender lines so completely that multiple states refuse to screen it. What's utterly wild is that Nazimova, who also produced the film, sank her entire fortune into this passion project, creating a commercial disaster that ended her career, but secured her legacy as a queer cinema pioneer. The infamous Dance of the Seven Veils sequence was filmed with such erotic intensity that most of it was cut before release, with surviving stills suggesting it was far more explicit than anything else from the era. When screened in New York, police shut down the premiere midway through, citing moral corruption concerns, while critics were divided between those calling it degenerate trash and others hailing it as the first authentic art film. Nazimova reportedly had affairs with Wilde's niece Dolly Wilde and other women of literary circles, bringing personal authenticity to this adaptation. Film historian Vito Russo uncovered evidence that Nazimova intended the film as a deliberate challenge to sexual norms, making it perhaps the first intentionally queer film produced in Hollywood, a distinction that cost its creator everything, but ensured her immortality in cinema history. Queen Christina, 1933. Queen Christina showcases Greta Garbo in her most daringly queer role, portraying Sweden's androgynous 17th century monarch who famously refused to marry a man. Released just before the Hays Code clamped down on sexual perversion, this historical drama features Garbo in men's clothing, kissing women on the lips, and declaring her desire to die a bachelor. The film was so controversial that it was banned outright in several countries, including Germany, where the Nazi regime cited its degenerate portrayal of monarchy, though their actual objection was to its queer themes. What's particularly bold is how director Ruben Mamoulian frames Christina's relationship with her lady-in-waiting as explicitly romantic, with lingering touches and meaningful glances that leave little doubt about their intimacy. When the production code was retroactively applied to films in circulation, censors demanded cuts to scenes where Garbo's character discusses her disinterest in conventional womanhood. Critics of the era carefully avoided mentioning the film's queer elements in mainstream publications, though underground gay publications celebrated it as a rare representation of their lived experience. Garbo herself, widely rumored to be bisexual, fought for the role and insisted on maintaining the character's gender fluidity against studio pressure. Film scholar B. Ruby Rich discovered studio memos revealing MGM executives' panic over the film's unwholesome influence, particularly on female audiences who might be inspired by Christina's rejection of traditional gender roles. The film's famous final shot of Garbo's stoic face staring toward an uncertain horizon became an iconic image of queer longing and isolation that resonated with LGBTQ audiences for generations. Mädchen in Uniform, 1931. Mädchen in Uniform shattered taboos as the first mainstream film to depict lesbian desire with sympathy and depth, focusing on a sensitive schoolgirl who falls in love with her female teacher at a Prussian boarding school. This German masterpiece was so explicit about its sapphic themes that it was banned internationally, with both the Nazis and the U.S. government declaring it dangerous to public morality. The groundbreaking production featured an all-female cast and crew, itself a radical statement in early 1930s cinema. What's absolutely jaw-dropping is that the film narrowly escaped destruction when the Nazis burned degenerate art, saved only because lead actress Dorothea Week had connections to high-ranking officials who protected the print. The film climaxes with a suicide attempt prevented by the collective action of schoolgirls. A revolutionary happy ending for queer characters when most were forced to die tragically. When Eleanor Roosevelt arranged a private White House screening, it sparked a wave of clandestine showings in women's clubs across America, despite its official censorship. Critics who dared review it wrote in coded language about its intense emotional attachments and unconventional relationships, while lesbian communities passed information about screenings through whisper networks. Film historian B. Ruby Rich uncovered letters from women describing how seeing the film helped them understand their own sexuality at a time when lesbian identity had virtually no cultural visibility. When finally screened at the Museum of Modern Art in 1976, elderly women who had seen it in secret decades earlier came forward with stories about how this singular film had validated their existence during the darkest days of queer repression. Morocco, 1930. Morocco features Hollywood's first explicit female same-gender kiss, with Marlene Dietrich, dressed in a man's tuxedo, confidently planting a kiss on a woman's lips during a cabaret performance. Director Josef von Sternberg deliberately pushed boundaries with this pre-code film, showcasing Dietrich's androgynous appeal and sexual fluidity in ways that would become impossible just a few years later. The film's distributor, Paramount, nearly shelved it after preview audiences in conservative areas walked out during Dietrich's gender-bending performance. What's particularly daring is how the film frames this moment not as scandalous, but as alluring, with Gary Cooper's character becoming more attracted to Dietrich after witnessing her kiss another woman. When the Hays Code was enforced, this scene was often cut from television broadcasts and revival screenings, essentially erasing a pivotal moment in queer cinema history. Critics at the time described Dietrich's performance as exotic and foreign, code words that acknowledged her challenge to American sexual norms while attributing it to her European background. Dietrich herself, openly bisexual in her private life, insisted on keeping this scene despite studio nervousness, understanding its importance to her persona as a sexual revolutionary. Film scholar Maria Riva discovered that Dietrich specifically requested von Sternberg include this moment to express her own authentic sexuality on screen, making it a rare instance of personal queer expression in early Hollywood. The American Film Institute later recognized this scene as one of cinema's most important moments, representing the brief window between the advent of sound film and the enforcement of censorship when queer identity could be explicitly, if briefly, acknowledged. Pandora's Box, 1929. Pandora's Box stars Louise Brooks in her iconic bob haircut as Lulu, a sexually liberated woman whose lovers include the breathtaking Alice Roberts as a tailored suit-wearing lesbian countess. This German silent masterpiece featured cinema's first explicit lesbian character, who wasn't villainized or portrayed as predatory, showing genuine romantic attraction between women. The film was so progressive that it was heavily censored worldwide, with American distributors cutting most scenes between Brooks and Roberts, claiming they were too disturbing for public sensibilities. What's particularly revolutionary is how director G.W. Pabst frames their relationship as the most healthy and caring one in Lulu's life, contrasting it with her destructive relationships with men. When screened in Berlin's vibrant queer community of the late 1920s, audiences recognized it as the first authentic representation of lesbian identity in cinema. The Nazi rise to power nearly erased the film from history, with many copies destroyed for its degenerate content and Jewish director. Critics initially panned it as morally corrupt, but it was rediscovered in the 1950s when feminist and queer film scholars recognized its groundbreaking portrayal of female sexuality. Brooks later revealed that Roberts was so uncomfortable with their intimate scenes that Pabst had to personally demonstrate how to kiss Brooks, creating tension on set. Film historian Thomas Elsesser uncovered production documents showing that German censors specifically objected to the Countess displaying masculine characteristics and inappropriately directing her attentions toward another woman, forcing cuts that were only restored decades later. When the complete version was finally screened at LGBTQ film festivals in the 1980s, audiences were stunned by how explicitly queer this 1929 film actually was. Lot in Sodom, 1933. Lot in Sodom pushed the boundaries of experimental cinema with its explicit homoerotic imagery while disguising itself as a biblical morality tale. Created by avant-garde filmmakers James Sibley Watson and Melville Weber, this short film retells the biblical story with lingering shots of muscular, nearly nude men engaged in suggestive dance movements. The film was effectively banned from mainstream distribution, shown only in private art circles and university settings, where its artistic merit provided a thin shield against obscenity charges. What's absolutely wild is that the filmmakers created innovative visual effects to capture male beauty, using Vaseline-smeared lenses and kaleidoscopic imagery that transform men's bodies into abstract patterns that could slip past censors. When screened at a private New York gallery in 1934, police raided the venue, confiscating the print, but returning it after art critics testified to its historical and cultural significance. The film features extended sequences focusing on the male inhabitants of Sodom, gazing desirously at Lot's angelic visitors, with extreme close-ups of lips, eyes, and torsos that leave no doubt about the nature of their interest. Critics who dared review it used carefully coded language, praising its classical aesthetic and artistic nude studies, while avoiding any mention of its obvious homoeroticism. Film scholar Juan A. Suarez discovered that Watson and Weber were part of a circle of gay artists centered around photographer George Platt Lynes, bringing personal authenticity to their exploration of same-gender desire. When the film was restored by the George Eastman House in the 1990s, modern audiences were shocked by how explicitly queer this pre-code film actually was, with one reviewer noting it makes Kenneth Anger look tame by comparison. The Sign of the Cross, 1932. The Sign of the Cross features Hollywood's most infamous lesbian seduction scene, with Claudette Colbert as Empress Poppaea bathing in milk while attempting to seduce another woman. Director Cecil B. DeMille, known for biblical epics, ingeniously slipped this queer content past censors by framing it as depicting Roman depravity that Christians would overcome, essentially hiding homoeroticism in plain sight as a morality tale. The bathing scene was so controversial that it was completely cut from re-release versions after the production code enforcement, not to be seen again until film restorations in the 1990s. What's particularly audacious is how DeMille includes an effeminate male character named Ancaria, performing a seductive Dance of the Naked Moon that's played with complete seriousness rather than for comic relief. When the film was re-released in 1944, the Legion of Decency demanded extensive cuts, removing nearly 10 minutes of morally objectionable content that happened to include all queer-coded scenes. Critics at the time noted the film's shocking authenticity in portraying Roman decadence, a euphemism for its sexual content. Film historian Richard Maltby discovered production memos showing DeMille deliberately pushed boundaries, telling Paramount executives the controversial scenes were historically accurate when challenged. LGBTQ film festivals in the 1980s began screening the uncut version as an example of pre-code queer representation, leading to renewed scholarly interest in how filmmakers navigated early censorship. The film's Roman orgy sequences feature same-gender couples in the background, a detail so subtle it escaped initial censorship, but was noticed by queer audiences of the era who spread word-of-mouth recommendations to see the film before it was inevitably cut. Olivia, 1951. Olivia remains the most explicit lesbian film to somehow slip past international censors in the conservative 1950s, focusing on an all-girls boarding school where two headmistresses compete for students' affections. French director Jacqueline Audrey, one of the few female directors of her era, crafted this sensitive exploration of awakening sapphic desire with such artistic credibility that censors couldn't easily dismiss it, despite its obvious queer content. The film was released in the US under the misleading title The Pit of Loneliness to invoke association with Radcliffe Hall's famously banned lesbian novel, yet still faced bans in multiple states. What's remarkable is how the film presents its lesbian characters with dignity and emotional depth, rather than as predatory or mentally ill. The standard portrayal in this era. When screened at the Venice Film Festival, it caused such controversy that several jury members walked out, yet others fought for its artistic recognition. Critics struggled to discuss the film, with many reviews awkwardly avoiding any mention of its central lesbian narrative, referring instead to intense emotional attachments and unusual friendships. Film historian Patricia White discovered that the film developed a secret following among lesbian communities in the 1950s, with private screening parties organized through whisper networks. Simone de Beauvoir praised the film's authentic portrayal of women's relationships uncorrupted by male fantasy, while mainstream critics dismissed it as unrealistic for the same reason. The film's most provocative aspect might be its ambiguous ending that neither punishes nor pathologizes its queer characters, a radical departure from the narrative requirements imposed on Hollywood films dealing with homosexuality, making it a unique cultural document of lesbian representation that survived an era determined to erase such stories. Un Chant d'amour, 1950. Un Chant d'amour remains the most explicitly homosexual film of its era, directed by gay literary icon Jean Genet as a provocative art piece celebrating male desire. This silent short film depicts the erotic relationship between two prisoners who communicate through a wall, sharing an intimate moment by passing cigarette smoke through a straw inserted between the bricks. The film was effectively banned worldwide, with customs officials in various countries seizing and destroying prints, making it one of the most censored films in history. What's utterly shocking is that the film includes scenes of male masturbation and full frontal nudity at a time when even heterosexual content was heavily restricted, establishing it as perhaps the first explicitly gay, erotic film made by a major cultural figure. When underground screenings were arranged in New York in the 1960s, police raided venues and arrested organizers on obscenity charges. The film features a prison guard who voyeuristically watches the prisoners, creating a complex commentary on how queer desire was both policed and fetishized by authority figures. Critics who managed to see it described it in coded language as poetically authentic, while avoiding specific descriptions that might themselves be considered obscene in print. Film scholar Richard Dyer noted how the film's explicit sexuality was inseparable from its political message about institutionalized homophobia, making it both art and activism. When finally screened at LGBTQ film festivals in the 1970s, audiences were stunned by its unflinching portrayal of gay sexuality from decades earlier. Jonas Mekas, who was arrested for screening the film in 1964, later called it the most important underground film of its time, representing a defiant assertion of queer desire during the height of sexual repression. Anders als de Andern, different from the others, 1919. Anders als de Andern wasn't just banned, it was hunted down and destroyed by the Nazis in their effort to erase queer history from existence. This groundbreaking German silent film stars Konrad Veidt as a violinist blackmailed for his homosexuality, leading to his social ruin and suicide. The film was created explicitly as propaganda against paragraph 175, Germany's anti-gay law, making it the world's first pro-homosexual film. What's absolutely mind-blowing is that it was co-written by Magnus Hirschfeld, the pioneering sexologist who founded the world's first gay rights organization, bringing scientific authority to its progressive message. When the film premiered in Berlin in 1919, conservative groups rioted outside theaters, and it was quickly banned under German obscenity laws despite its educational framing. The film includes the revolutionary line, "You must not condemn the homosexual for being homosexual, any more than you would condemn someone for having a different eye color." Critics were divided between those praising its social courage and others condemning its dangerous ideas, with one reviewer calling it a threat to German youth. Film historian Richard Dyer discovered that when the Nazis rose to power, they specifically targeted this film for destruction in their book burnings, with only fragmentary scenes surviving today thanks to copies hidden in Hirschfeld's Institute archives. When partially reconstructed in the 1970s, LGBT audiences were astonished by its modern approach to gay rights arguments, using many of the same points activists would make decades later. Its tragic ending doesn't moralize against homosexuality, but instead explicitly blames society's treatment of gay people, a revolutionary perspective that wouldn't be seen in cinema again until the 1960s, making it one of history's most important and nearly lost queer cultural artifacts. Thanks for watching these hidden chapters of film history. Which banned film shocked you the most? Do you think modern audiences would still find these films controversial? Comment below with which classic you'd most want to see restored and screened. And remember, today's controversial cinema might be tomorrow's groundbreaking classic. So what boundaries should filmmakers be pushing right now that society isn't ready for?